Kefka the nihilistic madman, the clown that captured the hearts of many gamers and earned his title of one of the most beloved video game villains of all time. Join me as I dive into his actions and take a look at his inspirations and what exactly makes him tick. And while I'm aware of some notable differences in Kefka's personality between the English and Japanese dialogue, I'm primarily going to be focused on the English localization, as that's the version of him that has garnered so much notoriety. "1,000 years before the game began, humans and Espers were said to have lived together peacefully until the War of the Magi happened. Humans were extracting magical power from Espers and infusing themselves with it, and began a war against the other Espers in an effort to extract their magic as well. To get away from the humans, the Espers would create their own separate realm to which they fled, where they dwelled for the next almost 1,000 years. There are two known instances of humans discovering the Esper realm. The first is when a woman named Madeline stumbled upon the Esper realm by chance and was found unconscious by the Esper, Maduin. Madeline was nursed back to health by Maduin, and the two of them fell in love and had a baby together, named Terra. 2 years after Madeline discovered it, the Empire, led by Emperor Gestal, discovers the Esper realm as well. Gestal, however, had more nefarious plans for his journey there. He wanted to capture Espers and use them for Magitech experiments. To counter this invasion, the Espers planned to seal up the entrance permanently, which left Madeline in a predicament. Does she stay here with Maduin and her child, abandoning the human world forever? Or does she escape before the entrance is sealed, as some Espers have been accusing her of being a spy for the Empire? To Maduin's surprise, Madeline grabs Terra and takes the opportunity to escape. Maduin finds her and Terra collapsed just inside the gate and tries to take them back with him, but the sealing spell rips Terra away and pulls her through the portal, followed by Madeline and Maduin before the gate is sealed completely. Gestal comes to next to the three of them, and realizing that Terra must be a human-Esper hybrid, kidnaps Terra for use by the Empire, strikes down and presumably leaves Madeline to die, and has Maduin taken into the Magitech research facility. Kefka doesn't get very much in the way of backstory. In fact, all we get for him is one conversation with a man in the bar in Vector, where he mentions that Kefka was the first person Sid attempted his Magitech experiments on. Kefka was given extraordinary magic powers as a result of the experiment, but the experiments were imperfect, and his mind was shattered in the process, leading to his transformation into the maniacal clown that we're all familiar with today. Kefka's rank in the Empire is never specified, but he appears to be fairly high-ranked, as he leads the journey to Figaro Castle to request Terra's return to the Empire. He takes control over the army in Sabin's scenario when General Leo is recalled, and he is shown to be personally acquainted with Emperor Gestal and heavily involved in Gestal's ultimate plans. Despite being a favorite of the Emperor, much of the Empire seems to not like him. A soldier patronizing the Vector bar tells us that he respects General Leo as a good man, as opposed to Kefka, but stops talking before he says something that could get him in trouble. And the army stationed near Doma actively shows disdain for Kefka, and opposes his plan to poison the waters surrounding Doma Castle. One last thing about Kefka's actions prior to the events of Final Fantasy VI is he was the one responsible for enslaving Terra by placing a slave crown on her head to allow the Empire to control her and her Esper powers. The game opens with the mind-controlled Terra leading a couple of soldiers, Biggs and Wedge, to some caves near Marsh to recover an Esper for the Empire. The mission would not be a success, and Terra would have the slave crown removed from her, causing her to regain some of her memories of Kefka enslaving her. Kefka's first appearance during the game is when he is sent to retrieve Terra, who is now on the run from the Empire. He makes a grand entrance showcasing his personality front and center, complaining about sand on his boots, in the desert no less, and making one of the soldiers traveling with him clean them off. He arrives at Figaro Castle and requests an audience with King Edgar. The two of them dance around a rumor that a girl on the run from the Empire had taken refuge there, ending with Kefka insinuating that Edgar lying to him would have dire consequences. Edgar is woken up in the middle of the night when the castle is set on fire and comes out to meet Kefka and his soldiers once again. Kefka repeats himself, demanding Edgar hand over Terra, but is still met with opposition, and Edgar, alongside Terra, flee Figaro before activating the castle's hidden function of being able to burrow beneath the desert. Kefka is next mentioned during the scenario split in Locke's scenario, when former General Celis is being held captive for opposing the Empire's decisions. She mentions a rumor of Kefka's plan to poison the people of Doma before being told to shut up. In Sabin's scenario, we get to see this plan in action. As mentioned earlier, the soldiers here seem to show disdain for Kefka, and he is left in charge of the army once General Leo gets recalled. Leo informs Kefka of the change in circumstances, and tells Kefka to stay in line and not cause any trouble in his absence. Kefka argues against Leo's claim that their enemies were still people, saying that there wasn't any need to show mercy to those who side with the Returners, a rebel faction actively opposing the Empire's actions, which was good for Kefka, since he never seems to have any mercy anyways. With Leo gone, Kefka orders the soldiers to ready the poison and hand it over to him. Before he can take action with it though, Sabin confronts him attempting to stop his plan. Kefka tries to dispose of Sabin, but Sabin is persistent and causes Kefka to give us one of the greatest lines in the game. Sabin tries to chase him down, but Kefka has some soldiers distract him and sneaks off to poison the waters. Kefka is next seen as the Returners return to Narsh, as he leads an army through the Figaro Desert towards Narsh in another attempt to claim the Esper found there for the Empire. He expresses no sympathy for the people of Narsh, as he orders his soldiers to do whatever means necessary to get him the Esper, ignoring the fact that Marsh was neutral and filled only with civilians. The Returners confront Kefka on the mountaintop near the Esper, and are able to hold him back, causing him to flee for the time being. During the Returners' raid of the Magitech research facility in Vector, Kefka reveals part of his plans. He's been collecting Espers and extracting their magic from them, in an effort to become all-powerful and revive the warring Triad. He then disposes of Ifrit and Shiva, as he had already drained their powers and they were now useless to him. Further on in the facility, Kefka apprehends the Returners and attempts to sow some discord by claiming that Celis was working as a secret double agent. He is backed up by some Magitech soldiers, but Celis, in an attempt to demonstrate her loyalty, teleports herself, Kefka, and the Magitech soldiers away, allowing the rest of them to escape. Sid realizes now that Kefka had misled him about the purpose of Esper research, and helps the Returners escape from the Magitech facility, where they reconvene with Setzer and the Blackjack. Kefka sends some cranes to attempt to stop them from escaping, but is unsuccessful as the Returners dispose of them and make it to safety. The Returners would then head to the Sealed Gate in an attempt to open it up and ask the Espers for their help in fighting Kefka and the Empire. But Kefka expected this and trails them there. At the gate, Kefka ambushes them and reveals that this was all part of his plan to have Terra open the gate for him, and then swoop in and claim the Espers for himself. The party keeps him busy while Terra opens the gate, and when she finishes, Espers come flying out through the gate and head off towards Vector, the capital of the Empire, to take their revenge for 20 years ago. Returning to Vector, the atmosphere seems very different. The soldiers are no longer hostile, and the returners are informed that Emperor Gestal wishes to meet with them. The damage done by the Espers had caused Emperor Gestal to realize that the path the Empire was on was a dangerous one, and the world would certainly be destroyed if it continued the way it had been. Furthermore, upon learning about Kefka's use of poison during the siege of Doma Castle, he had thrown Kefka in prison for his war crimes. He wishes to make peace with the Espers and requests that Terra seek them out and act as a mediator. With Terra being a half-Esper, he reasoned that she would be able to convince the Espers of his recent change of heart and stop them from tearing the world apart. He assigns Celis and Shadow to accompany her, alongside General Leo, to Crescent Island where the Espers were last spotted. Terra is successful in convincing the Espers to have a conversation with the Empire, but upon returning to Thamasa, things start to go awry. You didn't think the Emperor had actually had a change of heart, did you? The entire thing had been staged by Kefka and Emperor Gestal to again have Terra do the dirty work for them and bring the Espers out into the open. Kefka shows up with his Magitech troopers, drains the magic from the Espers, and absorbs their magicite. General Leo challenges and defeats what appears to be Kefka, but Kefka is a master of illusions, and Leo had only managed to defeat a shadow. Kefka creates another illusion of Emperor Gestal attempting to apologize to Leo for betraying him, before revealing himself and murdering Leo on the spot. Kefka and Emperor Gestal then return to the sealed gate to uncover the warring Triad and raise the floating continent from the Earth. We've mentioned the Warring Triad a couple of times so far, and they'll become extremely relevant in a moment, so now is probably a good time to talk about the three gods, Demon, Fiend, and Goddess. The three gods had descended from the heavens, but they were afraid of the power of the other gods, and so they warred against each other. They imbued humans with magic, transforming them into Espers, and used these Espers as weapons to fight against the other two gods. Eventually, they realized how frivolous the war had become, and the gods agreed to seal away their powers and return free will to the Espers. The gods turned themselves to stone and left the Espers with a final message: never must we be woken. Now existing as statues, the three gods sat facing each other, keeping each other's power in check. The power of one statue would be neutralized by the gaze of the other two. However, if their alignment were ever to be disturbed, then the equilibrium created by this stalemate would be ruined and the world may be torn apart. The returners follow Kefka and Emperor Gestal to the floating continent and find them in front of the warring Triad. Gestal begins absorbing energy from the statues and suggests that Celis and Kefka breed to produce soldiers for his new empire. Kefka, meanwhile, offers a sword towards Celis, requesting that she kill the rest of the returners in exchange for him and Gestal forgiving her treachery. Celis appears to consider it momentarily, before turning around and stabbing Kefka with the sword he gave her. Now on the back foot, Kefka turns to the statues and looks to draw from their power. Gestal realizes that Kefka has gone completely mad and pleads for him to stop before he revives the statues. When Kefka doesn't stand down, he tries to smite Kefka with his magic, but because Kefka is standing in the center of the warring Triad, all the magic sent towards him is absorbed by the statues. Kefka orders the Triad to smite Gestalt right back, and follows up by pushing him off the floating continent to his death. He then disables Celis and begins disrupting the statues of the warring Triad. Shadow returns to buy some time for the party to escape, but the damage has been done. The warring Triad has been revived and begins to tear the world asunder, marking the change from the world of balance to the world of ruin. In the New World, Kefka exists as a god, and the general population lives in constant fear of his fury. Acting against Kefka's will invites him to use his Light of Judgment, a beam used to incinerate towns and sunder the earth. We get to see the results of the Light of Judgment in a few locations. It was used on the town of Mobliz for unspecified reasons, and all of the adults in the town died protecting the children from Kefka's wrath. He used it on Sen when Celis arrived there because they refused to bow down to Kefka, igniting the mansion there and endangering the life of a young boy trapped inside. And South Figaro was seemingly destroyed by it during the one-year time skip, but was rebuilt by its citizens. A cult dedicated to worshipping Kefka has emerged, and the treasure at the top of their tower seems to imply some potential connections to the town of Thamasa. Kefka himself only makes a singular appearance in the world of ruin, at the end of the final dungeon, Kefka's Tower. His tower is located in the center of the southern continent, built on top of the ruins of the former capital of the Empire, Vector, and incorporates parts of the Magitech research facility and Imperial Palace into its architecture. It is here where Kefka spends the entire second half of the story. It's not known if he left his tower in the year between the events on the floating continent and Celis waking up, but from a gameplay perspective, once we regain control in the world of ruin, he only ever exists inside his tower. The tower must be handled by splitting up into 3 parties, and as each of the paths approaches the apex of the tower, Kefka has a member of the warring Triad standing guard. Now awoken from their slumber, they seem to have lost all sense of thought and are a slave to Kefka's orders and serve as his second-to-last line of defense. The returners believed that destroying the warring Triad would cause magic to disappear from the world and end Kefka's reign of terror, but are confused when it still remains after they emerge victorious. They reason that Kefka must have drained the magic from the statues, and his existence is what's keeping magic alive and well in the world. Past the warring Triad, the 3 paths converge at the summit of the tower where Kefka awaits. Kefka flexes his power on the party as they arrive, and then his nihilism truly shines through. He threatens to exterminate everyone and everything, and if things get rebuilt, he'll destroy those too. He questions the frivolity of it all, wondering why rebuild what's just going to be destroyed, and expanding it to why cling to life when you know you're going to die eventually anyways. Kefka is disgusted by the party's response in what they each find joy in, and calls upon the statue of the gods to aid him, swearing to destroy everything. While the party is busy handling the statue of the gods, Kefka ascends into a godlike form, ready to handle the party after they defeat the statue. Kefka is armed with the strongest magic in the game, as well as some of his own special abilities, including Heartless Angel, which drops everyone's HP to 1, and Forsaken, a spell that is about 50% stronger than Ultima. Despite everything though, Kefka is overpowered and defeated, and with his defeat, magic disappears from the world and espers cease to exist. Where do we begin with analyzing Kefka? He is one of gaming's most famous and beloved villains. He's an absolute maniac. He achieves his goal and wins, but still isn't satisfied and desires to see the rest of the world destroyed. He's nihilism incarnate. But why go to all this effort? What could cause someone to hate existence so much that he not only desires an exit for himself, but for everyone, both present and future? Well, unfortunately, that's a very difficult question to answer in Kefka's case. As I mentioned earlier, Kefka's entire backstory is given to us in 2 dialogue boxes by a random dude in Vector's bar. No stories about his childhood that reveal any trauma or demonstrate a personality trait that we can barely see shining through despite his madness. Only that the Magitech experiments performed on him had damaged his mind. And while we could certainly stop there and use that as an explanation for everything, it feels like a bit of a cop-out to just use that as a justification for everything that he does, so let's see what else we can find out about him. I briefly mentioned the Cult of Kefka earlier. The members of the cult are found in the Cultist Tower in the Serpent's Trench, which has been raised above sea level in the World of Ruin. Not much information about them is given, but we can infer a couple of things. The tower places a seal on all commands except for magic and item, and the enemies are named according to their magic level, which increases the higher you climb in the tower. This just emphasizes the role that magic plays in Kefka's world. He's the greatest mage in existence, having been imbued with magic by some Magitech experiments and absorbed the power from the 3 gods of the Warring Triad. In the original localization, the treasure at the top of the tower is simply known as the Gem Box, but starting with the Game Boy Advance release, it has been renamed to the Soul of Thamasa, and there are 2 potential conclusions that we can draw from that. The first being that magic is a central facet of the cult, and prior to the Cataclysm, Thamasa was the last city that still actively practiced magic. So perhaps the soul is simply a nod to the town that held on to the practice of magic for so long. Alternatively, since the cult of Kefka is obviously created around the idea of Kefka, it could hint at a connection between Kefka and Thamasa. Thamasa was founded by the Magi who had managed to evade punishment after the War of the Magi, and their ability to practice magic was passed down through their bloodlines. Public displays of magic were outlawed in Thamasa to not attract attention to their abilities, but residents would still practice in private. There's a fan theory that Kefka was originally from Thamasa, although it has, let's say, dubious origins, but let's humor the idea for a moment. If Kefka was originally from Thamasa, then perhaps he had some resentment towards the rest of the world for ostracizing his ancestors, the Magi, and when his mind shattered during Sid's Magitech experiments, this resentment started expressing itself as active hatred, and his new broken mind wanted to take revenge for the persecution of his bloodline. The origins of the Kefka being from Thamasa theory are obviously questionable, as I mentioned, but I'm really grasping at straws for stuff to fit in here. Like, literally, there's just no confirmed backstory to cover. Kefka's personality is a large part of why he's such a beloved villain. A villain who's a complete psychopath is always a lot of fun, because they're willing to go even further beyond, and you never know what to expect. As to them, nothing is too far. Right from the get-go, we get to experience Kefka's wild and narcissistic personality. Demanding his soldiers clean sand off his boots in the middle of a desert is obviously completely ridiculous, and yet here we are. Kefka's larger-than-life personality follows him through every single scene he appears in. His extreme measures to ensure victory over Doma, not giving a damn about the citizens of Narsh, toying with General Leo before killing him, betraying the most politically powerful person in the world, using the light of judgment to punish those who defy him, and finally, embracing nihilism and vowing to end the world entirely. Some of these decisions defy logic entirely, but Kefka's so sure of himself that he goes for them anyways, coming out on top time and time again. Until the one time he doesn't, obviously. And again, that's why we love him. Now, do I think he's deserving of the title of best villain of all time? Or even best Final Fantasy villain? Personally, no, not quite. He's still an excellent villain that does a lot of things right, but he doesn't have quite the character development or backstory that a lot of other villains get. Handsome Jack is a very similar character to Kefka, fulfilling the role of a psychotic villain in Borderlands 2. But when he does something completely insane, we can actually fully understand the motives for it. And with the pre-sequel, flawed as it was, we see his journey from Hyperion programmer to absolute maniac. I can't hold this against Kefka, since obviously Super Nintendo games were limited in what they were able to do compared to the more powerful PCs and consoles that we have today. And storytelling through video games has advanced significantly since 1994. Kefka's name likely comes from either Franz Kafka, an Austrian Czech writer famous for his existentialist novels, or Kurt Kefka, a German psychologist who was one of the founders of Gestalt psychology. Or possibly both. Franz Kafka is notable for his unique stories involving incredibly bizarre circumstances that would mix existentialism with absurdity. One of his most famous novels, The Trial, has the main character, Joseph K., woken up when two police officers show up to arrest him for an unspecified crime. The novel covers Joseph's slow descent into madness as he tries to uncover the mystery of his arrest, which is never given to him or the reader. One example is when Joseph is told to appear at the court, but he isn't told when or what apartment, and is forced to knock on every single door to find the court being held in the home of some random woman. He's criticized for being late, despite never being given a time, and again, he still has no idea why he's on trial in the first place. Do I think Kafka's novels relate in any notable way to Kefka? Not particularly. Nothing is so absurd to the point of confusion. Sure, it's silly for him to be wandering through the desert and forcing his soldiers to clean sand off of his boots, but apart from this outlier, all of his actions could be considered reasonable if you look at them from the point of view of a nihilistic madman. There is a song on the soundtrack, however, with some ties to Kefka named Metamorphose or Metamorphosis, which is similar to the English name for Kafka's most famous novel, The Metamorphosis. So perhaps there is something there. Take from that what you will. The more likely inspiration, at least in my opinion, comes from Kurt Kefka, a German psychologist who was one of the minds behind Gestalt psychology. One of the reasons I like this inspiration a little bit more is it also offers an inspiration for his initial ally, Emperor Gestalt's name. Prior to Gestalt psychology, the common view on psychology was known as structuralism. The core tenets essentially saying that everything complicated was built up of smaller individual parts. Gestalt psychology, however, offered the idea that complicated thoughts themselves were the foundational building block rather than these supposed parts they were composed of, and that the whole defined the parts as much as the parts defined the whole. And one of the central tenets of Gestalt psychology is that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Applying this to Final Fantasy VI, we could view the Empire as the whole, and its soldiers, researchers, and especially Espers as the parts making it up. On their own, the Espers are only so powerful, but as Kefka and Gestalt gather more and more Espers, they are able to raise the floating continent and attune with the warring Triad, effectively giving them unlimited power over the world of balance. To Kefka, though, Gestalt is simply another part making up the whole that is Kefka's reign, and eliminating that part actually increases the strength of Kefka's whole. I really hate that I just said that sentence. A common fan theory is that the entirety of the final boss fight is an allegory for the Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri. The poem follows Dante's journey through hell, purgatory, and heaven, ending with him meeting God. The first tier of the Statue of the Gods represents Hell and Inferno, the first part of the Divine Comedy. While Visage lacks the three faces that Dante attributes to Satan, he does somewhat resemble Gustave Doré's illustration of Satan, included in later copies of Inferno. Dante describes Satan as having his lower half encased in ice, and Visage is only visible from the waist up. Visage has a weakness to fire, possibly alluding to the ice prison that Satan is trapped in. The second tier represents the second step in Dante's journey, Purgatory. At first glance, this tier just appears to be a bunch of random people hanging out, and there could certainly be a number of ways to look at this reference, but here's what I'm gonna go with. When climbing up Mount Purgatory, Dante encounters the Italian troubadour Sordello da Goito, who describes to them that climbing the mountain is impossible at night due to the sun not being present. The sun in this case being an allegory for God, implying that progressing towards purgatory isn't possible without the presence of God in your life. The people making up the second tier could just be waiting for the sun, Kefka, to come out to allow them to continue progressing. Or perhaps it could be a rough reference to the procession in Canto 29, mentioning all manners of humans and creatures passing by. The third tier represents Paradiso, and the final part of Dante's journey as he makes his way through heaven. Lady and Rest heavily resemble Michelangelo's Pieta, which is believed to be a reference to a verse in Canto 33 of Paradiso. The sculpture depicts Jesus shortly after he was taken down from the cross and handed over to his mother Mary. In the Japanese version of the game, Lady's name is Maria, further lending credibility to the idea that this final tier references Pieta. And finally, at the end of it all, Dante comes face to face with God, and we come face to face with Kefka, although he resembles something perhaps a little bit more unholy in this form. He now resembles many of the famous depictions of the fallen angel, Lucifer. There's a bit of debate over Lucifer's true identity, but its most common use is as another name for the Christian devil, Satan, which paints a neat juxtaposition in this final fight. Our Statue of the Gods allegory indicates that we should be coming up on God. The background for the final fight implies that we should be facing the holiest of holy figures, and yet, rather than God, Kefka's there, front and center, or I guess a little bit off to the left, resembling the unholiest of all. This showcases how backwards and destitute the world of Ruin is, where we have the devil in charge of it all, and how twisted Kefka's mind is, painting himself as God despite all the destruction he's caused and still has ambitions to cause.